Hey guys, Reserming here. I'm doing my first of the readings today. I believe I have everything set up okay. You should be able to hear the music in the background all right. So the first one I'm doing is the Nutcracker. I'd have the window up, but my computer gets confused, and I can't play both the music and have the window up for the page, unfortunately. And the music's more important to me. So, I of course have read the first chapter before, and I'm going to be starting again from there because obviously you start the beginning. So I'm going to get right to it. Chapter 1, Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, the children of Dr. Stahlbaum were not allowed into the family room, let alone the adjoining living room. Evening had come, and Fritz and Marie Stahlbaum sat huddled in a corner, as was usual on Christmas Eve. No one had brought in a light, and so they sat in an eerie darkness. Excuse me. Fritz was whispering to his younger sister Marie, who had just turned 7, how early that morning he had heard rattlings and poundings from the forbidden chambers, and how he had just seen a small, dark man slipping a large box under his arm across the corridor, and how he knew it was none other than Godfather Drosselmeyer. Marie's eyes lit up, and she clapped her hands and cried, "Oh, what do you think Godfather Drosselmeyer has made for us?" Now, Judge Drosselmeyer was not the least bit handsome. He was small and thin, with a face full of wrinkles, and where his right eye ought to have been, he wore a black eye patch. He had no hair at all on his head, and so he wore a cleverly made white wig of glass threads. In general, Godfather Drosselmeyer was a clever sort of man who knew a great deal about watches and clocks and even made some himself. When one of the Stahlbaum family clocks was sick and he couldn't sing, Godfather Drosselmeyer would come and take off his glass wig and yellow coat and put on a blue apron. He would then stab all sorts of sharp instruments into the clock. Marie felt sympathy pains, but the clocks weren't at all hurt. In fact, the clocks purred and sang as joyfully as ever, which made the whole family happy again. Why can I not read on the day I chose to read? Drosselmeyer always had something in his pockets for the children when he came to visit. Sometimes it was a funny little man who rolled his eyes and bowed. Sometimes it was a box from which a small bird hopped, and sometimes it was something else. But every Christmas, the judge would go to extra effort to create something spectacular, so spectacular that children's parents would put it away for safekeeping afterwards. "What do you think Godfather Drosselmeyer has made for us?" Marie anxiously asked. Fritz said it probably wouldn't be any different this time. He expected a fortress where soldiers marched and drilled about. Other soldiers would come to overtake it, but brave soldiers inside the fortress would fire booming cannons to keep the intruders away. "No, no," Marie interrupted. "Godfather Drosselmeyer told me of a beautiful garden with a big lake with beautiful swans swimming around wearing gold necklaces and singing pretty songs. Then a little girl comes to the lake and calls the swans and feeds them marzipan." Hey, I actually got the sentence right. I screwed up the next sentence, but I got the first one right. "Swans don't eat marzipan," Fritz said scornfully. "And Godfather Drosselmeyer can't make a whole lake, a whole garden. Besides, they always take what he gives us away. I prefer what Papa and Mama give us. We can keep those and do what we want with them." The children continued to guess and wonder. Marie pointed out that her large doll, Madame Trudy, was more awkward than ever these days. She fell on the floor time and again, which put nasty marks on her face and was getting her dress filthy. She tried scolding her, but to no avail. Also, there had been the way Mama had smiled when she saw how happy Marie was with the little parasol for Gretchen. Fritz pointed out that his father was quite aware that his stables were missing a chestnut horse and that he was short of an entire cavalry. The children were certain their parents had bought them many wonderful presents, and that through the blessings of the Christ child, who looked down upon them with kind, loving eyes, Christmas presents were much better than any other presents. Their older sister, Louise, added that the Christ child, who brought them gifts through the hands of their loving parents, knew much better what they would like than they, so rather than wishing and hoping, they should remain patient and quiet. This gave Marie pause for thought, but Fritz muttered, "I'd still like a chestnut horse and some hussars." I still have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. Night had fallen, and Fritz and Marie huddled together in silence. It suddenly seemed there was a rushing of wings and a distant but beautiful music. A bright light touched the wall, and the children knew that the Christ child had flown away on shimmering clouds to other happy children. At that moment, a silvery bell rang and the doors flew open. Ah! The children froze as they stepped on the threshold, but Papa and Mama led them inside by the hand. Come in and see what the Christ child has brought you. Chapter 2, The Gifts. I ask you, the reader, to remember your most wonderful Christmas. Remember the beautiful, colorful presents and the lavishly decorated Christmas tree. You should be able to imagine how the children felt. With sparkling eyes, the children were completely silenced for a while. Then Marie gave a deep sigh and said, "Oh, how beautiful! Oh, how nice!" Fritz made a few exuberant leaps into the air. They must have been very good that year, because they had never been given so many wonderful and magnificent presents before. The big fir tree in the center of the room was covered in golden apples, silver apples, buds, and blossoms. Besides that, there were sugared almonds, colorful candies, and many other delicacies. Each and every branch was adorned, and best of all, hundreds of lights sparkled from within its branches like tiny stars. Its warm and inviting glow beckoned the children to pluck its fruits. Around the tree were such colorful and lovely gifts to defy description. Marie saw the prettiest dolls and all sorts of neat little items and tools for them. What especially caught her eye was a dress hanging from a rack so it could be seen from all sides. Excuse me again. It was made of silk and adorned with colorful ribbons, and after admiring it for a moment, Marie exclaimed, "It's so beautiful! Oh, I love it! Surely I'll be allowed to wear it!" Fritz had already galloped 3 or 4 circles around the tree on his toy horse, which he had found bridled next to the table. After dismounting, he said it was a wild beast, but that was all right. He'd tame it sure enough. Then he inspected his new squadron of hussars, who were dressed handsomely in red and gold. They carried tiny silver weapons and rode on horses so white that they almost looked like they were made of pure silver. When the children quieted down, they turned to the picture books, which were filled with beautifully drawn pictures of flowers, children at play, and colorful people. They were so lifelike that one could almost believe they might really move or speak. They had scarcely begun to delve into the books when the silvery bell rang again, and they knew Drosselmeyer's gift was ready. They ran to the table, where a silken screen Drosselmeyer had been behind all along was lifted up. Sitting upon the table was a green lawn decorated with flowers, and upon that sat a beautiful miniature palace with many golden towers, delicate little mirrors, and windows to see the elegant rooms inside. A bell rang, and the palace's doors opened. Inside, ladies with long dresses and gentlemen with plumed hats walked about the halls. There were so many candles burning in the silver chandeliers in the central hall that the whole room seemed to be on fire. A gentleman in an emerald cloak would presently poke out of a window, wave, and return into the palace again. Likewise, by the door of the castle, a miniature Drosselmeyer no bigger than Papa's thumb came out to wave at the children before returning inside. Fritz had been watching the whole scene with his hands on his hips. Presently he said, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, let me go into the castle." The judge gave him a disparaging look, and for good reason. Fritz was quite foolish to even suggest such a thing, for he was far too big to sit inside the tiny castle. Its golden towers weren't even as tall as he was. After watching the lords, ladies, children, the emerald cloaked man, and the miniature Drosselmeyer moving through their routines for a while, Fritz said impatiently, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, come out of the other door." "That cannot be done, Fritzkin," the judge responded. "Now let the man in green come out and walk with the others." "That cannot be done either." "Let the children come down. I want to see them up close." "It cannot be done," the judge said flatly. "Once it's been put together, it cannot be changed." "So," Fritz said dramatically, "then nothing can be changed? If that's how it is, then all your pretty little people don't mean much to me. I think my hussars are better because they can go forward or backward on my command, and they're not locked up in any house." And so Fritz sprang to the Christmas table, where he led out his squadron mounted on silvery horses to trot, turn, charge, and fire to his heart's content. Marie had also quietly slipped away, because she too had begun to find the walking and dancing dolls dull, but unlike Fritz, she was too polite to show it. A machine like this isn't meant for simple children, the judge said angrily to her parents. I'm going to pack it up. But their mother came over and asked to see the inside of the castle and the intricate clockwork that made the dolls move. So the judge took everything apart and put it back together again, which cheered him right up. He gave the children some beautiful brown men and women with gold faces. They smelled as sweet and pleasant as gingerbread, and both Fritz and Marie enjoyed them very much. At their mother's request, their sister Louise had put on the new dress she had received, and she looked very beautiful in it. But when Marie was asked to wear hers, she said she'd rather simply look at it, which she was gladly permitted to do. It's actually really interesting. This is actually my first time actually reading this, so this is very interesting to me. Chapter 3, The Favorite. Marie had lingered near the Christmas table when the others had left because she had seen something nobody else seemed to have noticed. After Fritz had disengaged his hussars from parading about the tree, a splendid little man became visible. He stood there quietly and modestly, as if waiting his turn. His build left much to be desired, aside from the fact that his stocky and somewhat long upper body didn't quite fit his small and spindly legs. His head was much too large. However, his fine clothing suggested that he was a man of taste and education. He wore a beautiful hussar's jacket of vivid violet and with lots of white trimming and buttons with matching trousers. He wore the most beautiful pair of boots that a student or even an officer had ever worn. They were so tight on his legs that they seemed to be painted on. Somewhat amusingly, a narrow and clumsy cloak was attached to his back that seemed to be made of wood. He also wore what looked like a miner's hat on his head. However, Marie remembered that Drosselmeyer wore an awful morning coat and an equally dreadful hat, but nevertheless was a kind and loving godfather. It also occurred to Marie that if Drosselmeyer were to dress as elegantly as the tiny man, he would not look nearly as handsome. She had quite fallen in love with the tiny man at first sight, and the more she looked at him, the more she could appreciate his good-natured face. His light green eyes, though protruding, were kind and friendly. The craftsman who had given him his combed white beard had done a fine job, for it made his sweet red smile stand out even more. "Oh!" Marie exclaimed at last. "Papa, who does the charming little man at the tree belong to?" "That," her father said, "that, dear, will work hard for all of you to crack many a tough nut, and he belongs as much to Louise as to you and Fritz." He gently removed the little man from the table and lifted up his wooden cloak. His mouth opened wide and wider, revealing 2 rows of sharp white teeth. At her father's behest, Marie put a nut into the little man's mouth and crack! The nut's shell fell away. Then the sweet meat inside fell into her hand. Her father explained that the Nutcracker, for that is what the tiny man was, had descended from a long line of Nutcrackers. The children shouted with joy, and Dr. Stahlbaum said, "Marie, since you're so fond of the Nutcracker, you can look after him. But remember, Louise and Fritz have as much right to use him as you." Marie immediately took the Nutcracker into her arms and gave him nuts to crack, though she always chose the smallest so he wouldn't have to open his mouth very wide, as she felt it wasn't very attractive. Louise came over to use the Nutcracker, and their new friend cracked nuts for her too. His friendly smile made it seem that he was happy to serve them. There was a Nutcracker with a happy smile. Fritz presently grew tired from his drilling and riding, and when he heard his sisters cracking nuts, he went over to investigate. He laughed heartily at the funny-looking little man. Now Fritz wanted to eat nuts, and the Nutcracker was passed from hand to hand between 3 of them. Fritz shoved the biggest and toughest nuts into his mouth. Suddenly there was a dreadful cracking sound that wasn't from the shell of a nut, and 3 teeth fell out of the Nutcracker's mouth, and his jaw hung loose and wobbly. "Oh, my poor dear Nutcracker!" Marie wailed and took him from Fritz's hands. "He's a naive, stupid amateur," Fritz declared. "He probably doesn't even understand his own craft. Just give him to me, Marie, and he'll crack nuts for me even if he loses the rest of his teeth or even his good-for-nothing jaw." Excuse me again. "No, no," Marie had begun to cry. "You can't have my dear Nutcracker. Look at how sadly he looks at me and shows me his wounded mouth. You're a cold-hearted person. You've beaten your horses and you even had a soldier shot." "Had to be done. You don't understand these things," Fritz said. Nutcracker's mine too, so give him to me. Marie began to cry harder and wrapped the injured Nutcracker in her little handkerchief. Then their parents came with Godfather Drosselmeyer, who, to Marie's dismay, took Fritz's side. However, her father said, I have let me talk again, I'm sorry about that. However, her father said, I have specifically placed the Nutcracker into Marie's care, which I can see he dearly needs right now, so no one may take him from her. Also, I'm very surprised at Fritz. As a good soldier, he should know that an injured man is never sent out to fight. Fritz looked very ashamed of himself, and without another word concerning nuts and nutcrackers, crept off to the other side of the table, where he posted some of his hussars as lookouts and sent the rest to bed for the night. Marie found Nutcracker's lost teeth and tied a pretty white ribbon from her dress around his injured jaw as a bandage. The poor fellow looked pale and frightened, so she held him more carefully than before, as if he were a small child, and looked at the beautiful pictures in the new picture books which were now among the other presents. Marie became quite angry, which was quite unlike her, when Godfather Drosselmeyer laughed and continually asked how she could humor such an ugly little man so. The Nutcracker's odd similarity to Drosselmeyer came back to Marie's mind, and she said very seriously, I'm not sure, dear Godfather, if you were dressed like my dear Nutcracker and had such nice shiny boots, whether you would look as nice as he does. Marie had no idea why her parents suddenly laughed so loud, or why Drosselmeyer's nose turned so red, or why his laugh seemed so weak. There was probably some reason for it. This is honestly more humorous than I thought it would be. Chapter 4, Wonders. As you enter the Stahlbaum family living room from the front door, to your left is a beautiful glass-fronted cabinet in which the children keep all of the wonderful things they receive every year. Lise was still very small when their father hired a skilled carpenter to build the cabinet, and he used such brilliant panes of glass and set them so skillfully that anything you put inside looked brighter and prettier than when you held it in your hands. In the highest shelf, too high for Fritz and Marie to reach, were Godfather Drosselmeyer's works of art. On the shelf below were the picture books, and on the two shelves below that, Fritz and Marie could put whatever they wanted, though it always happened that Marie put her dolls on the bottom shelf and Fritz quartered his soldiers on the shelf above it. And so tonight, Fritz put his hussars on the second shelf, and Marie moved Madame Trudy out of the way to make room for her new doll in the beautifully furnished room and invited herself in for sweets. As I've said, the room was very beautifully furnished, and that's the truth. I don't know whether you, my attentive reader, have such a nice miniature flower print sofa, charming little chairs, an adorable tea table, and best of all, a bed with a bright and shiny frame for your most beautiful dolls to rest on. Everything stood in the cabinet's corner, where the walls were papered with colorful little pictures, and you can well imagine that the new doll Marie had received, whose name was Madame Clairette, as Marie had learned that evening, was quite content with her quarters. It was now very late, almost midnight, and Godfather Drosselmeyer had long since gone home. But the children did not want to leave the cabinet, so their mother had to remind them that it was time for bed. You're right, Fritz said finally. The poor fellows, referring to his hussars, want a little peace and quiet, and they don't dare nod off while I'm still around. And so Fritz scampered off. But Marie said, Just a little while longer, just a minute. Leave me here, Mama. I have some things to take care of, and once I finish, I'll go straight to bed. Marie was a trustworthy child, so her mother knew she could leave her alone with the toys without worry. Still, she was concerned that Marie might be so distracted by her new doll and the other new toys that she might forget to put out the lights before leaving. So Mrs. Stahlbaum extinguished all of the lights except for the one that hung from the middle of the ceiling, which cast a gentle, graceful light into the room. Come to bed soon, dear, or you won't be able to get up on time, she called as she left for her bedroom. Once Marie was alone, she hurried to do what had been on her mind, something that she wasn't sure why she hadn't been able to mention to her mother earlier. She carried the injured Nutcracker to the table and gently set him there, where she unwrapped her makeshift bandages to see the wound. The Nutcracker was very pale, but he smiled a kind, sad smile that wrenched her heart. Oh, Nutcracker, she said softly, I know Fritz hurt you badly, but he didn't mean any harm. It's just that his wild soldier's life has made him a little hard-hearted, but otherwise he's a very good boy. I promise I'll take very good care of you until you're healthy and happy and can use your teeth and stand with your shoulders straight. Godfather Drosselmeyer will fix you up. He knows all about... Marie could not finish what she had started saying, because when she had said the name Drosselmeyer, Nutcracker's face had turned up in disgust, and his eyes shot green sparks. But just as she became frightened, Nutcracker looked at her with his kind, sad smile again. Marie realized that the awful face she had seen was only a trick of the light caused by the flickering lamp above. "I'm not a silly girl who gets scared so easily who thinks that a wooden doll could make faces," Marie told herself. "But I love Nutcracker because he's so funny and kind, which is why he must be looked after, which is proper." So Marie took her friend the Nutcracker into her arms and took him into the glass-fronted cabinet, where she knelt down in front of it. "I request, Miss Claret, that you give up your bed to the injured Nutcracker and manage with the sofa as well as you can. Remember, you're quite healthy and full of energy, because otherwise you wouldn't have such round red cheeks. And anyway, very few dolls, even the most beautiful, have such a comfortable sofa." Madame Claret... Why can I not say this name? Madame Claret looked very grand and morose in her Christmas finery, but she didn't make a peep. "What else can I do?" Marie wondered. She took the bed out of the cabinet and gently laid the Nutcracker upon it, still wrapped in a beautiful waist sash from his sore shoulders to above his nose. "You can't stay with naughty Claret," she said, and lifted the bed along with the Nutcracker up to the second shelf, where she placed it next to the picturesque village, where Fritz had stationed his hussars. She locked the cabinet and was making her way to her bedroom when, pay attention now, a quiet whispering and rustling sound came from behind the stove, the chairs, and the walls. The clock whirred over them, but it didn't strike. Marie looked up at the clock, and the large gold-painted owl that sat on the top had lowered its wings so that the whole clock was covered, and its ugly cat-like head and beak jutted forward. What's more, the owl seemed to be speaking with audible words. "Tick-tock, Stahlbaum clocks only whir and purr. Mouse King is so sharp of ear, whir, whir, purr, purr. Only sing the old song, whir, whir, purr, purr. Ding dong, I promise you he won't last long." Marie was now terrified and was just about to run away when she saw that Godfather Drosselmeyer, not the owl, was sitting on top of the clock. What she had taken for wings were really his yellow coat-tails. Marie gathered up what little courage she had left and cried up tearfully, Godfather Drosselmeyer, what are you doing up there? Come down, stop scaring me, you bad Godfather Drosselmeyer." But suddenly there was a great commotion all around. First a shrill giggling and squeaking, then a pitter-patter like 1,000 tiny feet behind the walls, and then 1,000 tiny lights peeping out from the cracks in the floorboards. No, not lights. There were small twinkling eyes. From every crack and crevice, mice had begun to squidge and squeeze their furry gray bodies into the room. Soon there were packs of mice running back and forth everywhere until they all stood in rank and file just as Fritz would position his soldiers before a battle. Marie thought they looked quite cute. Unlike some children, she was not at all afraid of mice, and her fear had all but passed when a squeal so shrill and sharp pierced the air that it made ice-cold shivers run through her back, and oh, what she saw! Now, dear readers, I know that you're just as clever and courageous as young Commander Fritz Stahlbaum, but I honestly think if you had seen what stood before Marie's eyes, you would have run away, jumped into your bed, and pulled up the covers high above your ears. But poor Marie couldn't run to the safety of her bedroom because, listen, just in front of her feet, a plume of sand, lime, and brick shards poured into the air as if by some underground force, and 7 mouse heads with 7 shining crowns rose hissing and squeaking from the ground. Then up came a mouse's body, at whose neck all 7 heads were attached. The mouse army gave 3 cheers in unison upon the arrival of this horrendous beast. There's something I've never seen in the ballet. I'm sure it exists in some of them, but just never the one I saw. Ooh, that's creepy. The mouse army had been sitting until now, but now they hopped to their feet and set themselves into motion. They hopped right toward the cabinet and toward Marie, who stood near it. She was so terrified that her heart beat so violently she thought it might jump out of her chest and she would die. Then her blood seemed to stand completely still in her veins. Nearly fainting, she stepped backward, and with a crash and a tinkle, shards of glass fell from the cabinet door pane, which she had accidentally pushed her elbow into. She felt a very sharp pain in her left arm, but her chest untightened, and she no longer heard the squeaks and squeals of the mice. Everything had become completely quiet, and although she didn't look, she believed that the noise of the breaking glass had frightened them into scampering back into their holes. But wait, what was that? Just behind Marie, in the cabinet, a small delicate voice began, "Awake, awake, on to battle this very night, awake, awake!" And then there was a beautiful and musical tinkling of bells. "Oh, that's my miniature carillon!" "Carillon!" Marie exclaimed happily. She jumped quickly to the side and looked inside the cabinet. There was a strange glow coming from within, and several dolls were running helter-skelter with their small arms waving about. Suddenly, Nutcracker rose up, threw off his blanket, and jumped with both feet out of the bed and loudly shouted, "Crack, crack, crack, stupid mouse pack! Squeaking, squealing, gnawing, clawing, crack, 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 stupid mouse pack!" And Nutcracker drew his little sword, branched it in the air, and shouted, "My dear vassals, friends, and brothers, will you assist me in this difficult fight?" 3 scaramouches, a pantaloon, 4 chimney sweeps, 2 zither players, and a drummer immediately shouted, "Yes, my lord, we will loyally follow you through death, victory, and battle." Inspired by the Nutcracker's speech, they made the dangerous leap down from the second shelf to the floor. They were not at all hurt, because not only were they dressed in soft wool and silk, there wasn't much inside them other than cotton and sawdust, so they plopped down like little sacks of wool. Nutcracker, on the other hand, would have almost certainly broken himself to pieces. He, too, sorry, there's just some typos here, and it's screwing me up. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out the sentence. Too feet to fall to the ground, and his body was as brittle as linden wood. Indeed, he would have likely broken his arms and legs had not Madame Clairette sprang from the sofa and thrust herself out from the bottom shelf to catch the Nutcracker, who descended brandishing his sword in her arms. "Oh, good dear Clairette," Marie cried. "I've misjudged you so badly. I'm sure you were happy to give the Nutcracker your bed." But Madame Clairette spoke now, embracing the young hero in her silken chest. "Please, my lord, as injured and sick as you are, do not go into battle. See how your courageous vassals are ready to fight, and how certain they are of victory. Scaramouche, pantaloon, chimney sweep, zither player, and drummer are already down, and you can see that the standard bearers on my shelf are moving. Please, my lord, either rest in my arms or watch your victory from the brim of my feathered hat." Thus Clairette spoke, but Nutcracker refused to be still and kicked his legs until she had no choice but to put him down. Nutcracker politely bowed on one knee and said, "My lady, I will always remember your grace, compassion in combat and strife." Then Clairette bent down so she could take Nutcracker by the arm. She gently lifted him up, quickly took off her sequin cincture, and tried to put it about his shoulder as a cape. But he took 2 steps back, put his hand on his breast, and said solemnly, "Please, do not waste your favors on me, my lady, because—" He paused, then tore off the ribbon that Marie had put about his shoulders and pressed to his lips. He let it fall, and it hung from him like a field bandage. Brandishing his sword, he jumped as nimbly as a bird over the ledge of the bottom shelf and down to the floor. You have probably noticed, observant reader, that the Nutcracker had felt Marie's love and kindness before he was properly alive, which is why he preferred Marie's simple white ribbon over Clairette's, even though it was quite shiny and looked very pretty. And what now? As Nutcracker jumped down, the squeaks and squeals began again. What a noise! Under the big Christmas table, the deadly hordes of mice waited, and over all of them the monstrous mouse with 7 heads loomed. What will happen next? Okay, I am going to take a break here. I'll be back after I get something to drink. Okay, I'm back. Chapter 5, The Battle. "Strike the battle, march, loyal vassal drummer," Nutcracker shouted. The drummer beat his drum so furiously that the glass in the cabinet shook and reverberated the sound. A rattle and clatter came from within the cabinet, and Marie saw that the lids of the boxes where Fritz's army was quartered had popped open. The soldiers were jumping out of their boxes and forming regiments on the bottom shelf. Nutcracker was running back and forth, shouting words to inspire his troops. "I see that dog of a trumpeter isn't moving himself," he cried furiously. Then he quickly turned to Pantaloon, who had become quite pale and whose long chin trembled. To Pantaloon he said, "General, I know how courageous and experienced you are. We need a quick eye and a quicker mind, so I'm trusting the cavalry and artillery to you. You don't need a horse, your legs are so strong you can gallop quite well on them. Now do your job." Pantaloon immediately put his long spindly fingers into his mouth and trumpeted so loud that it may as well have been 100 trumpets. From within the cabinets there came a nickering and a stamping. Marie looked inside and saw Fritz's dragoons and cuirassiers, and especially his new hussars, dropping down to the floor. With flags flying and music playing, regiment after regiment marched across the floor and lined themselves up into neat, wide rows. With clanks and clinks, Fritz's cannons were brought to the front. Boom, boom, boom they went. They fired tiny balls of sugar no bigger than peas that exploded and covered the mice in powdered sugar upon impact. Although it didn't really hurt, it was very demoralizing. Meanwhile, an artillery battery up on Mama's footstool was doing a considerable amount of damage. They were firing volleys of peppermints, which took down many of the mice. Yet the mice continued to advance, even overtaking some of the cannons, and there was now so much noise and smoke and dust that Marie could barely make out what was going on. But one thing she could tell for sure was that both sides were fighting as hard as they could. Sometimes it seemed that the toys would win, and other times it looked like the mice would take victory. Yet the numbers of mice were increasing rather than decreasing, and the small silver pills they shot with great skill had already begun to strike the glass-fronted cabinet. Madame Corette and Madame Trudy anxiously paced inside and wrung their hands. "Am I to die, the flower of my youth? I, the most beautiful of dolls?" Corette asked. "Was I so well preserved just to die here in my own home?" Trudy asked. Then they fell into each other's arms and cried so loudly that they could be heard above the commotion outside. And what a commotion it was! You can hardly begin to imagine the noise. Cannons boomed and clanged, tiny muskets fired, the Mouse King and his mice squeaked, and the Nutcracker shouted orders from amidst the cannons. Pantaloon, to his credit, had led some brilliant cavalry charges, but the mouse artillery had pelted Fritz's hussars with foul-smelling balls that left stains on their red jackets. Because of this, they lost the will to advance. Pantaloon ordered them to turn left. Caught up in the excitement of giving orders, he himself also turned left, and so did his cuirassiers and dragoons, and so they all marched left and went home. This left the battery on the footstool unprotected, and it wasn't long before a swarm of very ugly mice came and knocked the whole thing over, stool, guns, and gunners alike. Nutcracker looked very worried and ordered the right wing to retreat. Those of you who have led any battles yourself will know that retreating is no different than running away, and I'm quite sure that you feel just as sorry as I do that things turned out so badly for the army of Marie's beloved Nutcracker. But let us turn from this now and look at the left wing of Nutcracker's army, where everything is still going well, and there is hope for the soldiers and their general. During the worst of the battle, cavalry mice waiting quietly under the bureau threw themselves upon the left wing of the Nutcracker's army with horrible squeaks and squeals, but what resistance they found. Slowly, because of the difficult terrain that is the edge of the cabinet, the standard bearers under the command of 2 Chinese emperors had moved over and formed a square. These brave, colorful, and splendid troops consisted of gardeners, Tyroleans, Tungus, barbers, harlequins, lions, tigers, monkeys, apes, all of whom fought with composure, courage, and determination. With Spartan bravery, this elite battalion would have snatched the victory from the hands of the enemy had not a bold captain of the Mouse Cavalry daringly bitten off the head of one of the Chinese emperors, who in turn killed 2 Tunguses and a monkey as he fell. This formed a gap that the enemy could penetrate, and soon the whole battalion had been gnawed through. The enemy gained little advantage from this unfortunate turn of events, because every mouse who viciously bit into the middle of his valiant opponent got a printed piece of paper lodged in his throat and immediately choked to death. Despite this small gain, things were looking bad for the Nutcracker's army. Once they had begun to fall back, they found themselves falling back further and further and losing more people until all that remained was a small group backed against the cabinet. "Bring up the reserves," Nutcracker ordered. "Pantaloons, Scaramouche, Drummer, where are you?" He was hoping for fresh troops from the glass-fronted cabinet. Some brown men and women with golden faces, hats, and helmets appeared, but they were so awkward with their swords that they were no help at all. The only thing they managed to knock down was General Nutcracker's hat. The enemy chasseurs had soon bitten off their legs, and when they fell, they crushed and killed several more of Nutcracker's men. The enemy drew closer still, and there was no escape. Nutcracker would have jumped up to the cabinet's ledge, but his legs were too short. Madame Clairette and Madame Trudy could not help him, for they both laid in faint. Hussars and dragoons sprang past him into the cabinet. In desperation he called out, "A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!" But at that moment 2 enemy marksmen took hold of Nutcracker's wooden cloak and held him fast. Squeaking in triumph from 7 throats, the Mouse King sprang forward to take his kill. Marie could no longer keep what little composure she had, and without really knowing why, she removed her left shoe and threw it as hard as she could into the thickest patch of mice she could see, right at their king. At that moment everything faded from Marie's vision. She felt a stabbing pain in her arm and fell fainting to the floor. Chapter 6. The Illness. Marie awoke from a death-like sleep to find herself in her own bed. The sun was shining through the window, making the frost on the panes sparkle and shimmer. Sitting nearby was a stranger. No, Dr. Wendelstern, the surgeon. "She's awake now," he said in a soft voice. Her mother came over and looked at Marie with frightening, searching eyes. "Oh, Mama, dear, are all the mice gone? Is good Nutcracker safe?" "Don't talk about nonsense like that, Marie. What do mice have to do with the Nutcracker? You've been a very naughty child and worried us very much. That's what happens when a child is willful and doesn't do as her parents tell her. You played with your dolls until you became sleepy, and it may be that a mouse, which I find unlikely, jumped out and frightened you, and you fell back and pushed your arm through the glass. Dr. Wendelstern, who removed the glass from your arm, says if you'd cut an artery, you might have been left with a stiff arm, or bled to death. Thank God I woke up after midnight and noticed that you weren't in your bed. I went into the living room and found you passed out in front of the toy cabinet, bleeding heavily. I almost fainted from shock myself, and then I saw Fritz's soldiers, a lot of other dolls, and broken banners, gingerbread men, and not far away, your left shoe." "Oh, Mama, Mama," Marie interrupted. "Don't you see? That's what was left of the battle between the dolls and mice. The mice wanted to take the Nutcracker, and I got scared, so I threw my shoe at them, and after that, I don't know what happened." Dr. Wendelstern glanced at Mrs. Stahlbaum, then said to Marie very gently, "There's no need to worry, my child. The mice are all gone, and Nutcracker is safe in the toy cabinet." Then the physician, that is, Marie's father, came in and spoke with Dr. Wendelstern for a considerable length of time. He took Marie's pulse, and she heard mention of wound fever. She had to stay in bed and take some medicine for a few days, though aside from the pain in her arm, she didn't really feel ill or uncomfortable. She now knew that the Nutcracker had escaped the battle safe and sound. Occasionally she would hear, as if in a dream, the Nutcracker's voice, distinct yet weak. "Marie, dear lady, I already owe you so much, but there's more you could do for me." Marie tried to think of what it could possibly be, but she could think of nothing. She could not play with her toys because of the pain in her arm, and the illustrations in the picture books swam before her eyes until she had to give up on them, and so time seemed to draw on forever. She could hardly wait for evening, because then her mother would come and read her all sorts of beautiful stories. One evening, her mother had just finished a story of Prince Ficardin when the door opened and Godfather Drosselmeyer stepped into the room. "Now I must see for myself how the sick and injured Marie is doing," he said. As soon as Marie saw his yellow coat, the image of the Nutcracker losing the battle against the mice came back into her mind. Automatically she said, "Oh, Godfather Drosselmeyer, you were so ugly. I saw you up there on the clock, covering it with your wings so it couldn't strike and scare away the mice. I even heard you call the Mouse King. Why didn't you help the Nutcracker or me, you ugly Godfather Drosselmeyer? It's your fault that I'm hurt and sick and stuck in bed, isn't it?" Marie's mother, shocked, asked, "What is wrong with you, Marie?" However, Godfather Drosselmeyer made an odd face and said in a rasping, monotonous voice, "The pendulum had to purr and pick. It could not strike, nor could it tick. But now the bells sound loud and strong, dong and ding, ding and dong. Doll girl, don't be afraid. The king of mice has gone away. The hour returns now swift and quick. Pick and peck and pick. Bells ringing, dong and ding. Clocks whir, purr and purr. Pendulums must also purr. Clink and clank, whir and purr." Marie stared wide-eyed at Godfather Drosselmeyer. The judge looked somehow uglier than usual, and his right arm was moving back and forth as if he were manipulating a marionette. Marie would have been very frightened had it not been for her mother's presence and for the fact that Fritz, who had quietly crept in, suddenly burst out in loud laughter. "Oh, Godfather Drosselmeyer, you're too funny today," Fritz said. "You're just like the jumping jack I threw behind the stove a while back." Their mother had a serious expression on her face and said, "Dear Mr. Drosselmeyer, what odd entertainment. What is it all about?" "Heavens!" the judge responded with laughter. "Don't you know about my watchmaker's ditty? I always sing it to patients like Marie." He quickly sat close beside Marie's bed and said, "Don't be angry at me for not putting out all 14 of the Mouse King's eyes, but I've got something for you that I think will make you really happy." With those words, he reached into his pocket and swiftly pulled out the Nutcracker. His missing teeth had all been set firmly back, and his wobbly jaw was set straight again. Marie shouted with joy, and her mother said, "See how well Godfather Drosselmeyer thinks of Nutcracker?" "You still have to admit, Marie," Drosselmeyer interrupted, "he's quite ugly. I'll tell you how such ugliness came into his family, if you want to listen. Or maybe you already know the story of Princess Pirlipat, the Witch Mouselinks, and the Clockmaker." "Wait a minute," Fritz said suddenly. "You fixed Nutcracker's teeth and jaw, but he's got no sword. Why is he missing a sword?" "Oh!" Drosselmeyer responded indignantly. "You have to complain about everything, boy. Why should I find him a sword? I fixed his body. It's up to him to get a sword if he wants one." "That's true," Fritz said. "If he's any good, he'll know where to find his weapons." The judge turned again to Marie. "So, Marie, do tell me, do you know the story of Prince Pirlipat?" "Oh no," Marie said. "Do tell, dear Godfather, do tell." "I hope, dear Mr. Drosselmeyer, that your story won't be as horrible as the ones you usually tell," her mother said. "Not at all, dear lady," Drosselmeyer replied. "On the contrary, the story which I have the honor of telling is a fairy tale." "Tell us the story, dear Godfather," the children begged, and so he began. Okay, so I'm going to pick this up tomorrow at 7. Chapter 7, I mean. It's starting to get late here. But I did want to get this one done. I'm going to mark here where I am. So we're going to start with Godfather Drosselmeyer's fairy tale. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I will be back tomorrow with the rest of the Nutcracker and the Mouse King, and hopefully I'll be able to finish it then. But my voice is kind of getting shot now. I have to admit, this is very interesting. I've never read this before, so So it's actually interesting to see the original writing here. Obviously, there's some liberties taken in the translation because I believe it was a German tale originally. But I'm enjoying it so far, and hopefully you are too. Alright. See you guys tomorrow, and have a great time wherever you are. Bye, guys.